Today's topic is the tree of many fruits and the Atma Paradigm version of On the Origin of Species. This is a two-parter, so today in part one we're going to look at a new theory for the appearance of species. And I start with this cryptic phrase. What is this tree of many fruits? Well, here it is. This is a real tree, actually sitting in the grounds of Syracuse University in New York State. And it was created by grafting together 40 different types of fruit trees. And I think this has got something useful to tell us about today's topic, on the origin of species. But we're going to come back to this tree a little bit later. Now, to enter into this presentation of a new paradigm for the appearance of species, we're going to need to recap where we've got to in these recent talks, but also pull together some of the metaphysical concepts that we have presented in earlier parts, particularly in part two when we dealt with reality and matter. So, 2 weeks ago, we looked at the evidence that demonstrated how thoughts, emotions and trauma within the subtle mind can produce changes to our physical bodies. And we considered evidence that indicated that the mind might play a role in the template that determines the morphology of the body. And last week we took it a stage further when we looked at what a physical body offers an organism. So an organism is any individual human, animal or plant, and we suggest that all organisms share the attribute of life characterized by sentience, i.e. the presence of consciousness. And we've established the case that such sentience is due to the presence of the conscious entity, what we call the Atma. Now, the objective of a physical body for an organism is therefore to accommodate the aspirations of consciousness, particularly by facilitating the consciousness's aspirations for two activities, which are to experience and to express the will of consciousness to enhance those experiences. And these aspirations are provided for within a body. And it's provided for within the body by a set of sensory objectives, which are in two groups. One, a set of sense perception abilities, and another of a set of action abilities. Now, the perception ones are the faculties of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Now, there are some other senses that some creatures do enjoy. For instance, the ability to detect magnetism and electrical fields. So some people say we got a lot more than 5, and that's true. There are certainly special abilities, and I think they're more widespread amongst creatures than we might think. But the 5 here are the main ones that produce the conscious experience of qualia and are shared amongst pretty well every creature. Now, it also seems that the specialized sensibilities, such as detecting magnetism, electric fields, and so on, are actually linked to the organs of the 5 main senses, or they're linked to the way that those organs produce qualia experience. For instance, it's been shown that certain moles sense magnetic fields, but they do so using the organs of their eyes. Somehow or other, the ability is within that organ. And for others, where there's awareness of electric or magnetic fields that are used for direction and for spatial experience, this seems to link it to visual and audio type qualia. So, besides the perception senses, there are the faculties of action: moving, manipulating, communicating, reproducing, and evacuating. And I've referred to these as faculties or senses, which may seem odd. But the reason is that here I am distinguishing these sensory faculties as psychological objectives. And that means they're different from the actual sensor organs, like the actual ear, eyes, nose, etc. And i.e. it's difference between senses in terms of the abilities which they produce and the organs that facilitate those abilities and objectives. Now, we have drawn on Sankhya philosophy to explain that these bodily organs are produced from a set of underlying information held within the mind. And it is this information that specifies the type of organs and limbs that a creature gets to enjoy the use of. So in this way, there is a subtle state of the body held as a mental concept, something within the mind. And this is the overall information form that defines all the faculties to be enjoyed by a particular creature. It represents the objectives or purposes for its various physical organs and limbs. And we call this the organism's subtle body, or the Sukshma Sharira. And it is the form of this subtle body that provides an organism with its, what we call, morphological template. The set of information that specifies the location, the form, the attributes of each of these organs and limbs, and thereby generates the whole form with its features and the faculties belonging to that organism, whatever that particular species type happens to be. Now, we showed this last week, laid out like this in a kind of figurative way to represent a sort of generalized arrangement of the senses of perception and action for the species within the kind of phylum grouping of Animalia, which includes animals, plants, and fish and birds and things. Reptiles, not plants, sorry. Animals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles within Animalia. And we discussed that this concept of a subtle morphological template was important because the analysis of biology in terms of genetic information and cellular activity was that neither DNA nor the cells could account for the overall form of the body. There was nothing that we could find within the biology of our bodies that could account for its overall specification and form, nor how that form is specified during the processes of development within the embryo, within the womb, or of organogenesis, which is the formation of specific internal and external organs. So our concept of the subtle body addresses a key question in biology. What is coordinating the development and the sequence of that development, leading to the formation of the overall form of the body for every organism that is ever born? Now that's a very big question for biology to leave open, or to fill in with some vague notions of chance or some kind of stochastic processes at work. The Atma Paradigm at least offers something that could be useful, maybe even testable. Now, we summarized the constitution of the subtle body, drawing on these concepts described in the metaphysics of Sankhya. And we suggested that the subtle body is a package of the following sub-biological features. And it includes the three cognitive elements: persona, intelligence, and the pool of the mind. The set of the 10 senses or faculties that we've talking about, the 5 perception and the 5 action faculties. And also the 5 prana life airs. And altogether these comprise that package of the subtle body, the Sukshma Sharira. Essentially, this is a package of specifying information contained within these elements and somehow related and dependent on the cognitive functions. Now, in each and every living being, a particular Sukshma Sharira body is present. And that subtle Sukshma Sharira body envelops the consciousness of the Atma, and it defines the sense, our sense of identity, and also determines the form of our physical body. So it is present from the earliest development of the body. How that's possible? Well, we're going to explore that in another time. But so far what we have established is that the information content of the subtle body is in the form of psychological intention. And we've seen how such intention can affect and influence physical properties. And in talk 2.8, we explained the process, how intentional information specifies the proto-physical qualities of the Tanmatras, and these in turn act as the template to produce the physical properties, forms and features of our biological body. Now, That works fine, explaining the development of a body when starting from something that's already existing, i.e. a fertilized egg. The egg is already set up with its DNA and all the relevant cellular machinery in place. And therefore you may think, well, it's perfectly reasonable to propose the subtle body as the means to coordinate the further development of that fertilized cell. But can this concept of the subtle body help us to explain or to elucidate what is happening with the first appearance of a life form? Can it help us with the origin of species? Now, to address this, I think we're going to have to clear some things from our minds, certain preconceived, outdated assumptions. I think we need to have a new way of how we understand the nature of matter and how it is manipulated. For instance, there's a tendency that we consider the physical stuff as the all in all, and that in order to get one physical thing, you have to start with another physical thing. Now, the Yoga Sutras suggest that this is like thinking that the best way, or the only way, to produce a lovely gold ring is to take an existing gold object, like this Krugerrand coin, and beat it into shape. To somehow evolve that coin from the shape that it currently is in into the desired shape and purpose and function of the ring. Now, that's not how any goldsmith would do it. You see, if you see two objects that may be relatively similar size and made of the same stuff, don't assume that one was made from the other. In fact, it's kind of crazy to think that that should be the process, even though the two objects have distinct features. And because there is no logical process for achieving that transformation. Yeah, this is a little dig at evolutionary theory. Yeah, we agreed we found some nuggets of valid evidence and principles at work when we analysed the various theories of evolution in earlier sessions. However, I have to say overall, as an account for the appearance and diversification of the species, we found it full of kind of 19th century limitations, contradictions, and lots of unsolved phenomena. So there's a real need for a new paradigm that provides a mechanism that doesn't rely on chance and which more closely accords with the actual evidence. So back to our coin and ring. One wasn't beaten into the other. Both were produced from a common source of material. This is the process whenever you want to produce it. You get that material into a suitable molten state and pour it into different molds that will specify a ring or that will specify a coin. So even if you did take your Krugerrand to the goldsmith and said, turn this into a ring, what they would do is ultimately just try and take it back to its earlier state, molten gold, and pour it into a new mold. They don't try and evolve it from its current state into the next state. Okay, well, what about upcycling, I hear you ask? Well, how does that work? For instance, you can turn an old car into a sofa, you know, but this isn't evolution really, because the primary advantage of a car is to transport you on the road, and that's been lost. Upcycling always entails diminishing the original dynamic of a thing for a purpose that a simpler object could have carried out. You don't need to turn a car into a sofa. You can make a sofa out of much simpler things. But we're interested in matter coming together to form the most intricate of all objects, increasing complexity, a living organism. Now, the Yoga Sutra uses some figurative language to introduce us to the concept of how material objects, including bodies, are formed. And it explains that the physicalities of objects become manifest by subtle matter being poured into their template molds and manifesting the physical form. In the same way as that gold, molten gold, is poured into the mold to produce the ring or to produce the Krugerrand coin. So this, according to the Yoga Sutras, is the process for how the physical bodies of all creatures come into being. Not just when we are born from a mother, but as a general principle. Now, to appreciate how this might be so, we have to go back to something we talked about some time ago, the concept of a field. Now, fields have different connotations depending on your subject. This is what we think of as a field when we're talking agriculture. It's a wide expanse of space that facilitates things happening on and within it. I'm going to use it as a bit of analogy because we have an empty field here. It could be ready for planting, and the seeds can be planted in the ground, and they can turn what was a flat field of maybe just soil into a three-dimensional form, a crop of golden barley wafting in the breeze. And a field in terms of physics isn't that different, because it's also an expanse of space that manifests particular physical properties depending what is embedded as information seeds within it. So we can think of it in the same way. Those seeds provide an information template that specify the physical attributes that emerge from the field. It is that information which molds the form that the field produces. So these properties, for instance, we can see the shape of the coloured three-dimensional form in this diagram. That emerges from the information quantities that are placed at each point within the grid, which you can see, you know, the little square thing at the bottom. So in each, what we really have is a grid, and this is what we start with. We have space defined by this grid, and where the lines intersect are our points. And we're going to plant a single seed in each intersection of the grid. And I want you to think of the potency of each seed as a number between 1, which is pretty poor, should do better, to 4 for excellent growth. And the potencies of the seed at each intersection on the grid are going to be described by a data set shown along the bottom of the diagram. Now, currently in our diagram, the data set is all zeros. So this is the situation. No seeds have been planted yet. No information is inhered on the field. But now we're going to plant our seeds. And here we've planted seeds on each of the intersections on the grid. Now, the data for these seeds is shown. The first batch of 5 numbers is 2, 1, 2, 2, 1. And that represents the 5 seeds along the line starting from A along to B. The next 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 is the line behind them, and then there's 4, 4, 4, 3, 1 in the middle line, and so on. Now, in a field, these vertical lines are virtual. They're invisible. They exist only as information. And normally in physics, they are a quantity of information. They're information in terms of a particular quantity. But they could be quality. But the overall effect of all these information points starts to manifest a physically observable form. From these lines, which are virtual, you can start to see a shape appearing. And that becomes deeper and deeper and deeper until it becomes fully manifest here as this 3-dimensional form. So that is the physical reality of the field. That is what we will observe. But it only exists because there is an underlying space which acts as a field, and there is information within that field that is generating the physical form. And this is crucial. This is how physics works. This is how we now know it. And we've got to apply the same principle when we look at how things manifest in all objects, including physical bodies. Now, in physics, there are cases where there can be information present, but no physical properties are manifest. So our little diagram here has 3 states. It's got the first state where there's no data whatsoever, but it's also got the middle one where there is data, which positive data. It's got certain positive quantities associated with them, but it's not yet manifest for whatever reason. And there's also data which is positive and manifest. So you can have situations where there is data but not yet manifest. Now, to explore this, we start with a reminder of a teaser I gave you some time ago about light. That light is a wave or particle. Now, this is part of the so-called dual nature issue of light, and in fact, of all matter things. And the phenomena, of course, is explored, as we showed in the famous double-slit experiment. In this case, we start with a source. This time it's pumping out electrons. Each electron travels from the source through both slits. Yes, the one thing travels through both slits. It can do that because that electron is manifesting itself as in wave properties, which can be spread out over space, i.e. in many places at once. Now, the electron proceeds merrily in this wave form until it hits the scintillation screen. And the scintillation screen is performing a measurement on it. It's asking, where in this field can I find the electron? And the electron then manifests. It replies by manifesting its location as a particle, and it does so at some point within one of the green lines on the screen. So what is the electron, a wave or a particle? And the answer from physics is that it is better not to think of it as either. Really, an object in physics is best understood as a packet of information that can specify the physical properties of that object, and they might be as wave properties or as particle properties. And the information that makes up the object is represented by a kind of quantum wave function. Now, I've represented it here as this kind of wavy thing within the green brackets of our diagram. This is how it was explained to me by a physics professor. And I like to use it because it's a simple way of getting our heads around something which is complex and profound. Now, the amplitude on the lines of this waveform varies along its wave packet. So that's why they start out small, get bigger, then get back smaller again. It looks kind of oval. And at the moment, the object exists only as this information packet, i.e. it's in its quantum state. Now, our quantum object here has the potential to collapse this quantum state and manifest physical properties if a measurement is applied to it. And the properties that it's going to exhibit, for our simple example, is either going to be blue or it's going to be red. So, with the quantum objects, we're never going to tell which property will actually manifest. It will be a probability of one or the other. But we can calculate the probability of each outcome happening by looking at how much of the wave packet it involves. Now, in our simple case, the probability for this packet of information to manifest either blueness or redness is 50-50, which means that one half of the wave packet would specify that the object appears blue, and that's the left-hand bit that I've shown here, and the other half would specify the object manifesting itself as red. Now we need to make a measurement. We want to know which property it will display. Bing, it's red. Or more precisely, the quantum information state has manifest the observable property of being red. This is the idea that underlying physical matter is a state of information that describes the range of possibilities for the physical properties that an object or field can manifest. Now, I'm not suggesting a direct correlation between quantum physics and the metaphysics that we're talking about in Sankhya and Yoga Sutras, but there's a parallel here in how each system models the workings of matter. And in both systems, it may seem that we're getting something for nothing, but that is not the case. Physical forms and properties do not appear out of thin air. They arise from underlying probability or specifying information states. And recently I was listening to a physicist, Sean Carroll from Caltech, urging us not to think that the quantum information state is somehow less real than physical reality. We have that tendency. Only when something is real and observable and measurable do we think it's real. Otherwise, it's virtual, it doesn't really exist. It's not reality. And Sean Carroll and others are really against that sort of idea. He actually suggests we should look at it the other way around, that the underlying information state is perhaps more real because it is the state of matter which determines what the physical stuff might be like, what it will look like, what it will do. And the information state pre-exists the physical, and it persists, whereas the manifested properties come and go. So which is more real? He suggests information state. Now, I'm not, as I say, I'm not suggesting a direct correlation, but this perspective of modern physics towards the role of information chimes with many of our Vedic ideas. Now, we explored some aspects of this way back in session 2.8. And as you see, I'm kind of drawing quite a few things together here in order to make our particular proposition regarding the species. Now, physics recognizes that there are forces at work within nature, and these affect the way nature behaves, and therefore they're called modes of nature. They change the mode of way of working of matter. Now, the most familiar one in physics is entropy, that mode of nature which tends to break things down, that increases disorder, and we see it in the tendency of objects to disintegrate over time. Now, more recently, physicists are talking about another mode, formation. Sometimes they call it syntropy, or often development, or even evolution, but it's not really evolution in the species sense. It's simply a way of saying that that nature has a kind of force or a power, a mode that tends to bring stuff together, that develops form and structure. And we suggested that this picture of the different modes of nature and forces at work is complete when we bring in a third mode, stasis. And stasis confers balance and permanence, preservation, and the sustainability of things. Now, each of these modes has a power to affect the manifestation of matter. And because these three are incessantly at work, we think of them competing with one another, vying to have greater influence than the others. That's why I've been portraying them as kind of colours in a triangle. And in this triangle, where I've got stasis, I've added the kind of parallel concept from Vedic thought, which described in Sanskrit. So stasis as sattva, formation as rajas, and entropy as tamas. Now, the effects that can arise from the mixing of the different quantities of each of them produces almost unlimited permutation. So that's why we've kind of got this colour spectrum. Any colour can be produced from these interactions. And the mixing of the gunas is complex and far beyond anything we can quantify. So although I'm trying to explain it figuratively as a triangle with some colours in it, this doesn't do justice to the powers of these modes acting in nature. And any particular point in the triangle is a kind of a three-way coordinate defined by how much of the power of stasis does it have, how much of the power of formation, and how much of the power of entropy does it have. So it's a three-way coordinate. And we refer to this combination of the quantities of the three modes as GUNA-DATA. This information formula of the gunas contains all the specifying power to manipulate matter. And in the examples we gave of the Princeton PEAR experiments, we established the proof of principle that intention can affect behavior and the state of physical systems. And with the Rice experiment, we were able to link that intention to the guna modes and show how more sattva results in preservation and more tamas, entropy, produces an increased deterioration. So all of this gives us a glimpse of what might be possible through this metaphysical technology. And I use technology in its proper sense as knowledge which can help us manipulate matter in order to produce the goods and objects and things we want in life. So that's what technology, it's the application of knowledge. So we are applying metaphysical knowledge to matter to produce results. So it is this ability to adjust and set the permutations of these guna powers of nature that is described in the Yoga Sutras. And it's described as being very potent and very effective as a material technology. So this guna or yoga technology has important implications for understanding the appearance of the species. Now, I'm going to kind of give you a little introduction to how Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras presents this. Now, many Indologists and scholars who study the Yoga Sutras are deeply impressed with the analysis, the insights on psychology and consciousness that Patanjali offers. It's considered one of those brilliant and comprehensive treatises on the nature of consciousness and the workings of the mind, at least as described in the first 2 chapters of the work. But many of these scholars have real difficulty when we get to chapter 3, which is the siddhis, the explanation of the various powers which yogis can attain from the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. Now, to the scholars, Patanjali has lost it. They think the descriptions in this chapter just appear to be too mystical, too fantastical, that something has gone wrong with this very profound scholar who has done so well on the psychology. But Patanjali, anticipating this from his readers, in the beginning of the chapter, he points out and he makes a real effort to explain that these siddhi powers that he is about to describe are not magical. They're not mystical. They are ordinary abilities available to ordinary human beings, if you understand the process, i.e. the metaphysical technology that's at work. This is his point. This is the way matter actually works, if you understand it. When you clear your mind from what you thought was happening and where you thought the power did lie, now you see the power lies in manipulating information which specifies matter. Much more effective than trying to beat the coin into the ring. So I think we can liken ourselves as we approach the Yoga Sutras to what it must have been like for medieval folk if they ever heard what, someone traveling back in time arrived there and told them what electricity could do. You know that stuff that comes, between the clouds and, lightning? You can harness all that. And you can power huge machines and do all sorts of incredible things and move the earth in amazing ways. I think the medieval folk would have thought this guy's off his rocker. Such ideas are too fanciful, not possible. And maybe we're the same, hearing about these siddhis. They sound like magic, but only because we don't understand the metaphysical science that underpins it. Now, I've given some details of this in previous talks, and we're going to study more in depth in part 4, but for now we need a quick little summary just so that we can put it into practice regarding origin of species. Now, this is a particular verse from the third part of the 3rd chapter of the Yoga Sutras, and I'll read it out. By total comprehension of the gross nature, essential nature, subtle nature, constitution, and purpose of objects, one attains mastery over the elements. Now that's really obtuse. However, this verse has been unpacked by various yoga technologists of the past, and here's the essence of what this means as a process. We start with the objective, the artha vattva. This is the purpose, and this objective is represented and encoded as GUNA-DATA information. That is the anvaya. That is the information which is defined by that objective and which then will go on to define everything else. So this GUNA-DATA flows through the proto-physical and physical aspects of matter. First, it specifies the shukshma, the latent proto-physical sensory qualities to be manifest. And then it goes on to manifest the physical properties at two levels. First, the common physical attributes, and then the particular physical features. Now, all of this may seem rather obtuse, so I'm going to condense it and just apply it to our specific issue of the appearance of a new species. We start with the material stuff that the world's made of. I'm using the word prakritic matter, prakriti type matter, to indicate that I'm modeling matter in terms of the Sankhya system. Now, with prakriti, it refers to the sum of everything that is material, ever as it is manifest to our observation, the physical stuff, as well as that which is invisible and unmanifest, i.e. the information and the subtle aspects that underpin physical reality. So these are in two categories. I'm just keeping it simple. The cognitive elements, which is the stuff that makes up mind, intelligence, ego, and so on, and the physical elements, and that includes the proto-physical qualities, the Tanmatras, and the physical properties, the Mahabhutas. Now, the first factor of that statement from the Yoga Sutras refers to arthavatva, purpose or objective, which in the case of the appearance of the species is the objective aspiration of an organism of a particular species. And it's an objective defined in terms of expression of will and experience within the parameters of a specific set of perception and action faculties. So this psychological objective represents the purpose of a particular species type, and it can be categorized and encoded within a set of GUNA-DATA. This is the Anvaya. This information state fully represents that objective, and it takes real form within the cognitive elements. It's what we've been calling the subtle body of an organism. So this set of GUNA-DATA of the subtle body acts as the morphological template that will drive the manifestation of the physical body. It is the constitutional information that will specify and be contained within all subsequent manifestations. First, it manifests the Tanmatra, subtle sensory qualities. And this is the proto-physical state of matter. And a useful translation of Tanmatra is as the measurement of something. That's what Tanmatras mean. Tat matra. That which is the measurement of something. So we can see, and think of this rather, as the measurements and specifications, say for a new outfit that we want to order. So we go into the place and they kind of measure up us for a new shirt or something. And the measurements is not the actual outfit itself, but it's what will determine how the outfit will manifest. So the Tanmatra qualities are the measurements and qualities that lead to the manifestation of physical objects, which in our case of our species type means that the Tanmatras contain all the details of the various senses, the organs and the features of the physical body, and what it'll be able to do and what it will look like when fully manifest as the biological body. Now, up to now, we've always discussed the cognitive elements as being present within our own mind stuff. Now, we've talked about the mind as being part of our own kind of setup. It's the part of the package of me as consciousness and my mind and my body. But now we need to go beyond that and understand that the cognitive elements have a broader context. And the thing that we call our mind is composed of just one little portion of mental stuff, of these elements. The mind is made up of the cognitive elements. It doesn't just exist within the bit that is associated with my or your bodies. Now, that's hard to grasp, especially if we just assume from general philosophy of mind that mental stuff only happens or is only created when someone is thinking. But no, the cognitive elements are real material stuff, although they're subtle. And they have a different nature to the physical stuff. But just to give an example, our physical bodies, our biological bodies, are made up of different chemical elements. You know, you've got carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, and so on, they're the main ones. And the same elements are also found in the world around us. So some of the world's chemical elements are found in bodies of humans, animals, and plants, and so on. But most of the chemical elements are not being used in bodies. In the same way, we should realize that the cognitive elements also exist in the world around us. Some of those elements, some aspects of those elements are being used for minds, etc., associated with consciousness and its bodies. But some of those elements are not being used for minds linked to bodies. And what the Yoga-Sutra is saying is that there is the possibility of molding these mental, subtle elements, these cognitive elements that are outside or beyond our bodies, anybody's bodies, that the elements that are not being used currently by any creature, any sentient being. That's how this yoga technology is a process for manipulating and manifesting matter, not just manipulating, but manifesting matter by using the cognitive elements beyond our bodies. But this raises two questions, and we have to address those first. If this line of thinking is going to be useful. First, can the cognitive elements take a template form that is not connected with a live body? And secondly, can this template form bear on physical or biological systems? Now, to some degree, these were addressed in what we learned from the evidence of what was called cases of the reincarnation type. These indicated that the mental content of a person could in some way be preserved and manifest in a new incarnated body. So it seems that information of a cognitive kind has the ability to persist during the period between the times of the demise of the body that it was previously connected to before its installation in a new body. Now, it was connected with the Atma at that time, but still the cognitive thing continued to exist in that situation. And we saw that mental information in the form of specific trauma, you know, in those cases where someone might have been killed or untimely or even murdered in a previous life, we saw how that mental information was being conveyed between the two lives, however that might be happening. And somehow or other, it was able to bear on the physicality of the new body by, for instance, the birthmark associated with a gunshot wound from the previous life manifesting as birthmarks in the new life. Now, that's all helpful. I think it's helpful, but I think we need to go further in order to address these two questions. And therefore, I'd like to introduce you to another form of experiments that were carried out by Princeton University as part of their PEAR program, the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research program that they did. Previously, we talked about their experiments using a quantum-based random event generator. PEAR later developed the idea of creating a portable version of this device that they could take outside for exploration and experiments. They called it FIELDREG, going out to the field. And here, this is the later model that PEAR developed through an offshoot company called Celeron and made available to the public. This is the one that I have sitting on my desk, and I use it from time to time for my own little experiments. Now, for these experiments, PEAR wanted to see if the emotions or excitement or mood of a group of subjects could register on the output of this device. In other words, subjects, you know, for the experiments that they previously did, we talked about the subjects were consciously trying to influence the reg. But with FIELDREG experiments, the group being monitored didn't even have to know that they were being monitored. They didn't have to express any conscious intent to affect the device. Nor, they found out later that doing the experiments, the device didn't have to be anywhere near the group. It could be just as effective sitting in the lab. It didn't need to be a field device. Now, here is one result they produced from a healing session. And it was published in their paper, Consciousness, Field Effects, Replications and Explorations. Now, the FIELDREG is calibrated so that under normal operation, i.e. outside experiments, it should average along the green baseline. So the deviation from the baseline shown by the red arrow is significant, very significant in this case, in statistical terms. It demonstrates the availability of some state of psychological information that can act on the device to produce such deflection. But the question is, how can we tell if this effect is related to the event or the group activity that we think we are examining? And for that, what they had to do was to check if the output was related to the psychological states of a group. And they wanted to see if there was a correlation between the readout and the timings of significant events that would affect the psychological state of the group, i.e. something that would be a particular change of mood or something that happened during the time of monitoring. So many cases were observed, and these included dramatic and often tragic world events, and others which might have involved spiritual healings, which had its particular moments, or sporting matches where there is a sudden kind of score in football, real football. And here's one they did for a Halloween party, in which the lab could correlate the changes of trajectory, i.e. where the deflection, where the line, the jagged line was moving, with the timings of different things happening at the party. And in the paper PEAR published on these findings, they concluded that their results were statistically significant from a scientific point of view, and that they indicate a real effect of group emotion on the equipment, and that their research indicated the real existence of what they called a pervasive consciousness information field. Now, Robert John and Brenda Dunn, who are the leaders of PEAR throughout all this, noted in their paper that it'll be necessary to seek a new explanatory model and theoretical structure to accommodate these results. This is something that is a real scientific evidence. What is your theory? How do we accommodate this if our current physicalist paradigm can't handle them? Now, I agree that we need an explanatory model. And I think the Sankhya and the Yoga systems are going to make a contribution in this regard. So I reckon that what PEAR has established, or what they've been observing through this, very closely parallels the state of information that we've been describing, taking form within the cognitive elements. There's a different use of language, but I think the concept is the same. And PEAR noted that the effect they observed was heightened by group resonance, i.e. when the group acted together or had a common interest and focus, or when there was emotional content, and that was much stronger than when there was some intellectual activity. And if the activity was engrossing and immersing, and the group was deeply involved in it, or if it involved intense creativity, or if it was fun, or novel or humorous. So I suggest our takeaways from this FIELDREG work is that group intention is able to set up an information state that is available or can be tapped into to manifest specific physical outcomes. Now, when we considered the top-down model of biology, we explained that the presence of consciousness of the individual Atma defined the objective of that organism, of that, the Atma looks after its body sort of thing, and that objective was encoded within the information of the subtle body template. And this coordinated the purpose and behavior of the cells and further down their use of the genes to ensure the development of the body within the womb or the egg. Now we suggest a level above individual consciousness, and that's group consciousness, group intent. This is the accumulated objectives of a group of Atmas, and this could be an inconceivable number of conscious entities. And it may not be a conscious one. It may be that their consciousness is being mined and gathered subconsciously for them. But either way, it's taking maybe what are common interests for experience and expression amongst huge number of conscious beings and taking all that information, which results in the formation of a species type template. So we have the body template, but we have a species type template. Now, the species type template would be a generalized form of the 10 senses that is meant for that species. So if a group of partying humans can produce a coherent form of group intent, it seems reasonable to suggest that the intentions of a mass collective of Atmas might also produce a generalized form of the type of organism they want to utilize. And then that species template will be further particularized by the individual Atma turning what is a general species template into the particular organism body template. Now, this process of gathering information subconsciously, of course, is what we know is at work in business and industry today. Your thoughts, your intentions, wants and needs are now high-value commodities. The data of your every desire is being trafficked between companies, and this determines what new fancy improved products they're going to produce, how many people want them, and how much they'll pay for them. It defines everything. So if puny little humans with a computer technology that is only decades old can gather and monitor group intention and turn that into reality in their way, in the kind of the limited physicalist system of technology, just imagine what Mother Nature can do. And these templates make sense when we think of them in terms of defining a particular set of perception and action faculties. As we mentioned last week, each set of faculties for different living creatures has particular strengths. Each set of senses is enjoyable in its own way. And this helps us define what we mean by a species. And our offering is that it is a grouping of organisms with a common particularized set of perception, senses, and action organs. And the particular set of senses would provide that species grouping with common psychophysical expression and experience, as specified by a package of GUNA-DATA. Now, I told you previously that there were something like 32 different definitions of species in zoology and biology and molecular sciences, but there's no harm having one more. Ours is different and it shouldn't be equated with the other definitions. Now, each of those other 32 different species will categorize life forms in different ways, and so do ours. The classification system is not fixed. Some will categorize certain creatures in this way as related to these, and another system will relate them in another. It depends what you are comparing. So, our category of the GUNA-DATA species is broader than pretty well any of those used in biology, because it allows for variance of the same species type. And I'm going to analyze that much more next week when we look at adaptation and variance within a species type. And that's why from now on, I'm going to, instead of the word species, I'm going to try and use the word species type, or guna species, or a Sanskrit term sometimes, which matches the kind of metaphysical model we're relying on. And that is calling a species type jiva jati, that which produces a particular type of jati, of physical body, grouping of those bodies for the Atma, for the jiva. Now, maybe late in the day, but let's bring all these concepts together to suggest how the subtle species template produced by collective intention could produce the first appearance of a novel species type. And to start with, we have the combination of the quantities of the different modes we call the GUNA-DATA. And the collection of combinations of the gunas within the triangle, such as our small purple triangle, is a particular packet of species type GUNA-DATA information. This data represents the collective aspirations of innumerable Atmas for a particular type of enjoyment and activity, which will be facilitated by a particular set of sensory faculties. So this species template is a subtle blueprint permanently existing within the cognitive elements, but only at certain times is it activated and manifests physically. And I think this is the concept that Richard Thompson or Sariputta Das had when he presented the bija seed model as an underlying mechanism for speciation. And like the seeds that we discussed earlier with our agricultural example, these information seeds of species type information will be planted onto our field grid and will manifest the actual physical form of the first of that species type. So here we've got the data is all 0, no information's there, it manifests no physical form. Now we plant the GUNA-DATA for a species type onto the field. Now, as we said, GUNA-DATA is complex, so this is a very simplistic modeling. And here the GUNA-DATA is represented by the set of numbers along the bottom. Instead of just one line, there's 3 lines because there's 3 factor. The data for each point is a combination of the 3 factors. A certain amount of the power of stasis, a certain amount of the power of formation, and a certain amount of the power of entropy. And I've highlighted the first set of data within the small purple triangle. It's quantity 3 of stasis, this is just me guessing, 7 of formation and 3 of entropy. And that's shown by the combination of the 3 arrows in the first point of the grid. So all this information in here on the grid represents the species type template. So both the template form and the field data are the same. The constitutional information, Anvaya, is the same in both cases, but it exists in different states and format. And like the analogy of the seeds, each of these data points of the template starts to manifest as physical properties. And this inevitably produces an overall emerging physicality, revealing the form, the features, the attributes, the faculties, the organs and the limbs of a brand new species, in this case, the wolf. Now, this proposition of how a species might appear for the first time may be new or seem strange to you. It is a different paradigm involving how nature works in a very different way, and certainly very different to how we might have been taught. It is important, though, because it resolves the major issue facing physicalist and reductionist approaches to biology. How does life first emerge from dull matter? The big question we analysed way back in 3.2. And the Atma Paradigm suggests that the need to try and account for a first primordial living being, the sort of life that we talked about in 3.2, is on account of a faulty premise that matter objects have to be produced from other matter objects. We are showing that does not have to be the case. So nor do we have to try and find some last universal common ancestor or the ancestor for different species, because a new species does not need to be produced or evolved from some other existing creature. Our proposition is that each species type exists in a permanent, subtle information state, a kind of seed state, a psychological template of the objectives representing that species type. And at certain times and instances, a species type template is activated and then generates the first population of its type, i.e. the species manifests fully complete in its faculties. Wow. Now this proposition might seem outlandish, but it accords with all the evidence we looked at when we previously were considering the kind of standard sources on evolutionary theory. And we're going to explore more on that next week. And we're also going to be discussing how once a species appears, there's scope for continual variation and adaptation within the limits that the GUNA-DATA template allows. Now, even after all of this, I wouldn't be surprised if you find this model for the appearance of the new species to be challenging. So I want to leave you today with a visual metaphor to meditate on. It's the tree of many fruits. This tree was created by an artist gardener. And as we mentioned, he grafted cuttings from 40 types of trees. But they were all trees that produced stone fruits, i.e. fruits with a stone in them, like peaches and apricots, but also very diverse things from cherries all the way to almonds. And I want you to meditate on this tree and to think And you know, in the autumn time here, if you see trees which are producing fruit, just think of those fruits as being so different from the twigs, the woodiness of the twigs and the branches from which they're produced. We don't gnaw at the branches, but we love the fruits. So they're such a different nature, and they just pop out at the end of them. And I think this has this offers us a way of thinking about how the different fruits are like the different species that appear and manifest as fully formed. You know, they have to grow into their full form, but they manifest actually complete from the earliest bit and then fully formed. And each manifests with their own distinctive forms and qualities. So we've got this tree of nature, and at the end of the twigs, pop, 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 different fruits are appearing, different species are appearing, fully formed. But of course they are coming from something, they're coming from the tree, but the tree is different from those fruits. So what I suggest is that we compare the tree with its trunk and its branches and its twigs. That's like that's providing the raw materials. That's like prakriti nature. It's the stuff that underpins all of this, that allows matter to come together to manifest the fruits and the species. So the fruits don't emerge from other fruits. There are no fruits within the trunk, branches, or the twigs. But there is something subtle hidden within the tree. It's the sap that flows from its base through every limb and feeds the appearance and growth of each fruit. So this is like the flow of Tanmatra information that flows invisibly within matter. But we never see that. We only see its physical manifestation. So for us, the tree of life is invisible. All we get to see are the fruits of its species. So the Tanmatra flow of sap enters the different grafted branches of this tree. And each grafted branch is like a different template. And it's a template defined by its specific GUNA-DATA. Is this sap now going to fill out the template of a plum, or is it going to be a mango? Is it going to be a wolf, or is it going to be a giraffe? So I think this is a way of understanding all this rather complex stuff that we've been talking about today. It's all captured in this analogy of the tree of many fruits. So all species and their manifestation are connected. But like these fruits, they are not produced one from the other. They all manifest from the common metaphysical reality of subtle information acting on the common materials of Prakriti. And this produces the complete diversity of life forms that we see on Mother Earth. So as you go through next week, or until we meet up next, please meditate on this vision of the world of species revealed within this amazing tree of many fruits. Thank you. So please join us next week for part 2 of this series. And so it's the tree of many fruits, continuing on the origin of species, part 2. And that'll be the same time, live, 6 o'clock UK time, here on Thursday, the 22nd of October. And again, please contact us on info@s-pi.org if you've got any questions or any suggestions. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.